The Minister of Marine and Blue Economy, Adegboyega Oyetola, on Tuesday defended a 10.9 billion naira 2024 budget for the ministry before the joint sitting of the Senate on Marine Transport and the House of Representatives Committee on Ports and Harbour, Maritime Safety, Education and Administration, Inland Waterways and Shipping Services. According to a statement on Wednesday, Oyetola, while speaking during the session at the National Assembly Complex in Abuja, stated that the proposed budget would enable the newly created ministry to perform its role of oversight and monitoring of the implementation of government policies across agencies under its purview in the marine and blue economy sectors. Oyetola added that there are plans to rehabilitate the eastern ports while equally dredging the inland and coastal waterways. Joining me to make sense of this and to further break this down is Bello Tuko, the Managing Director of River Lake, Nigeria. Thank you, Mr. Bello Tuko, for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. So let's look at this particular ministry. How vast and lucrative is it, and why are discussions and even the need for improved investment in this sector more pronounced now than ever before?
Well, thanks. Historically, the shipping sector was domiciled under the Ministry of Transport. It was normally overlooked by one minister, which covers not only marine transport but also rail and other transport sectors in the country. I think the government has done a huge improvement by actually getting a special ministry to actually look at this sector, because it requires a very special attention to be able to grow it.
All right, I like that you talked about this particular ministry requiring special attention. So talk to us, how vast is the potential in this particular ministry? What are the things Nigeria stands to gain as a result of, harnessing these potentials? We start from the potentials, then we move on.
Okay. There are a lot of potentials. I mean, in the past, the Department of Fisheries was domiciled under the Ministry of Agriculture. This is the first time that it's been moved from the Agricultural Ministry to the Ministry of Marine and Blue Economy. So that's the first step. There's a lot of potential for fishing, which has not really been explored over the past years, and I believe now with proper regulation and proper oversight, there is a huge potential for this sector. I mean, Nigeria is blessed with vast coastal waterways, so there is a lot of potential in terms of fishing and fishing exports. Even though there's been a lot of fishing and shrimping activity that actually goes on offshore, but I guess this time around there's a lot more priority on it to make it a very viable business.
All right. Okay, so very quickly, just before we move on, let's talk about these other things. Let's talk about this potential that we have within this particular ministry. Talk to us about the ones you think Nigeria necessarily, or Nigeria really needs to begin to harness the more, the ones you think have suffered over the years. In less than a minute, let's look at that.
Okay, well, first and foremost, there's a need to actually improve the infrastructure around the port area. It's been many years since Nigeria actually made a lot of investments as regards to port development. Under the government of President Obasanjo, there was concessions for around the ports, which has of course improved the efficiency and the management of the port area, but more still needs to be done. There's still a lot of bottlenecks that need to be eased. So I believe now with more focus in the new government, there is a huge potential to actually look into that and see how the ports can actually be developed to serve the nation efficiently.
All right, back to the budget now. The minister presented a budget of 10.9 billion naira, saying that his ministry will prioritize key areas like fisheries management, amongst other things. Let me just quickly try to take you through some of the areas that the minister said he was going to prioritize here. He talked about the fisheries. He talked about sustainable agriculture, and then aquaculture, maritime infrastructure development, which you've talked about, and research into ocean renewable energy sources. Now, talk to us about the prospects in these areas.
Okay, well, first of all, there is a potential for research, I guess, in terms of offshore wind, which can provide an alternative source of power. We can look into that.
Mr. Toko, if you can hear me, kindly hold your thoughts. We need to get somewhere right now. We have a broken story which we need to talk about now. Thank you so much. We'll be back to you after now. So just before we went on that timeout, we were talking about how that the minister had defended a 10.9 billion naira budget, saying that his ministry will prioritize key areas like fisheries management, sustainable aquaculture, maritime infrastructure development, and research into ocean renewable energy sources. And I'd like you to talk about this. What are the prospects in these areas, and how adequate is the proposed allocation?
Well, if we're looking strictly at the budget allocation, I don't think that would be particularly sufficient in terms of investment that's required in port development. However, in terms of research into developing the fishing potential of Nigeria's blue economy, I think that is a very positive step. There's also a need for a lot of research as regards to other alternative solutions to power, as we've seen in countries, especially those in Scandinavia that are very close to the North Sea, who also have a lot of deep offshore exploration. They have made significant investments and a lot of research towards looking at alternative solutions for power. And one of those is offshore wind. So offshore wind technology can really be something that might be an area for growth in the future for the country.
All right. Talking about aquaculture, talking about, the water and all of that, we've seen pollutions along coastlines and on waterbeds disrupting and degrading aqua life over the years. And there's also the issue of safety, talking about safety on Nigeria's waterways. Talk to me about how these impact the sector's contribution to the country's economy.
It's actually good that you mentioned pollution. So along our waterways, we will see a lot of plastics, and these plastics, as we know, are not biodegradable. A lot of them are coming mostly from our inland waters and finding themselves in the ocean. So there's a need for proper cleanup of all that plastic to be able to make our waterways easy for navigation, especially those within the inland waterways, and even those around the port area. These plastics are also finding themselves into the aqua life, which is not very good, as we tend to consume a lot of the fishes that come from these oceans. So I think the first thing that needs to be done is to actually intercept all these plastics, first of all coming from the rivers and the inland waters, and do a proper cleanup to help with navigation. And not only that, there's also a need for removal of a lot of wrecks within the port and the harbour area, which is also quite dangerous for navigation.
All right, still on Nigeria's blue economy, definitely. It's seen as a revenue prospect for government and one that can actually create, a lot of jobs. Talk to us about clear-cut metrics that would be apt, to determining its level of performance and contribution in these areas when it comes to job creation. I think we should just start with, how do we even start creating jobs? What are the things we need to do? Do we need some PPP arrangements going on? Is that sector doing well in job creation before we then talk about measuring, really?
Well, in terms of job creation, most of the marine and blue economy activity that you see today stems from the oil and gas industry. And most of that is also supported by the shipping activity that is going on around this oil and gas industry. There's a need, of course, to improve the training of the seafarers. We have one maritime academy here in Nigeria based in Oron, which is overseen by NIMASA. There's a need for more training institutions. And apart from that, the best way to actually create these jobs would definitely require public-private partnership with either big ship-owning companies or big shipping companies to be able to absorb all this labor that is going to come out of this academy and this maritime training institutes.
Well, looking at Nigeria's sports, they are currently not in their best shape. It's fraught with, dilapidated infrastructure and old equipment. Looking at all of this, aren't we supposed to start saying certain things, some sort of maybe some infrastructural, maybe trying to address infrastructural deficit and some other things, along global best practices to address what we currently have in the ports?
Like I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, there was a port concession that was done in 2006 by the then President Obasanjo government, where a lot of the terminals around the country were actually concessioned. And the major reason for this was actually to provide better service as well as make investments in cargo handling infrastructure. There's still a lot to be done. The concession was successful to a certain extent, but however, there is a lot of the revenue that is being generated from all the port concessionaires is being paid as either lease fees to the Nigerian Ports Authority or throughput fees to the Nigerian Ports Authority. Even though government has actually gotten a lot more revenue with these port concessions, there's still a need to give a little bit more concessions to be able to get more investments. As it is currently, there's operating ports in Nigeria has become very expensive, and with a little bit more relaxation on taxation, it will help those who want to make investment in this sector to get more returns on their investment.
All right, well, let's look at maintenance culture now. Well, poor handling of the ports and its equipment, of course, accelerates a whole lot of the dilapidation that we see in that space. And then, in turn, that leads to frequent repairs, revenue and economic loss to the government. This concession you talked about, is it addressing these issues? And what should be done to ensure that all the ports really function optimally? Is that concession also addressing this particular one? Because we're looking for a sustained revenue generation in that particular sector or that subsector.
Well, so those actually operating these concessions have actually done their best within the confines of what they have. However, there are also agreements to these concessions that have not been met by the government. One is the dredging of the ports. For example, Calabar, which was concessioned in 2007, there's still not been any dredging activity that's gone on for the past 15 years since it's been concessioned. So these, and this is a port that actually serves the eastern part of the country and also the northeastern part of the country to get those businesses more accessibility to ports infrastructure, there's a need for government to actually uphold their own side of the agreement. So, I believe this is something that the minister should really look into to see how this can be done to improve the amount of throughput that can actually come to a lot of these ports.
In closing now, what technical and maybe economic regulation do you think can help strengthen the blue economy in Nigeria? In closing, in just about 1 minute, let's have that.
Well, I think the key thing is just to make it a lot more business friendly. That's what it needs. There's already a public-private partnership in place as regards to port concessions that has worked for a few number of years, but then there's a need to actually improve the ease of doing business in Nigeria as regards to marine and blue economy is concerned.
All right, thank you so much, Bello Tuko, Managing Director, River Lake, Nigeria. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today on Business Edge.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that's our offering today on Business Edge. Many thanks for watching. I am Perpetua Fasami Peter, and at the top of the hour, we'll bring you news now. Stay with us. Bye for now.